So I watched Steven Spielberg's West Side Story remake, and I haven't been so embarrassed for a movie musical since they made Russell Crowe sing live audio for Les Mis. Oh, hi! Welcome to Storytime. Even though no one remembers it now, in the distant past of 2021, Steven Spielberg released a new adaptation of the musical West Side Story. It promised to be an update on the old classic, retaining everything you loved about it while removing the problems of the old film. I didn't see it then because, to be honest, I think the 61 film is a stone classic. Problematic, of course, but that's the territory you walk when you watch older movies. For what it's worth, we're not in Charlton Heston and Touch of Evil levels of not trying, and none of the characters come off as caricature. Not that that makes it any more not uncomfy, and I understand that your mileage may vary, but for me the good outweighs the bad enough that I can still enjoy it. I guess that's my prerogative as a white boy. Chief among its virtues is its music, obviously. For my money, West Side Story has the best score of any musical ever, full stop. Leonard Bernstein was at the height of his powers when he wrote it, and the results are triumphant. I shuddered to think what some contemporary Disney Fox executives would want to do with that material, which we'll get to. Beyond the music, there are also some classic performances, chief among them that of Her Majesty, National Treasure and EGOT winner Rita Moreno. But Russ Tamblyn is really fun, and Natalie Wood is iconic, as always. Minus brown face, of course. Then there is the filmmaking itself. Jerome Robbins' dance scenes are standouts of the film musical genre, and the movie's impressionistic sequences are a great match. I guess to me, remaking West Side Story would be like remaking The Sound of Music or Fiddler on the Roof. I mean, I guess you could, but why would you want to? What could you possibly hope to express that wasn't already expressed, in iconic fashion, no less? Turns out nothing! The new film feels like something generated by a chatbot following inputs from people who didn't understand the assignment. It looks like a movie, and usually acts like a movie, but it is as devoid of soul as it is possible for a group of thinking, breathing people to make something be. Everything about it is a hot mess. The script is confusing and needlessly complicated, the musical numbers feel either lifeless or entirely misbegotten, and the movie's pace is essentially that of a car running out of gas until it finally, thankfully, comes to an embarrassing stop. But above all, the film cannot sell us on its most important element, the fated romance between Tony and Maria. This is a feat that, given songs like Maria, Tonight, and Somewhere, should be impossible, but danged if they didn't find a way anyway. Anyway, let's get into it. First, let's talk about the script. Rather than merely updating the play's book or six-time Oscar nominee Ernest Lehman's screenplay, our writer Tony Kushner apparently decided to just kind of throw everything out except the general existing song structure and start from scratch. Which is fine, theoretically. He gives us a lot of snappy dialogue and some added nuance around the edges of the story.
That's good!
But there is also an awful lot of additions to the core of the story that actively make it not work.
Ooh, that's bad.
These additions range from neat but unproductive to needlessly complicated to outright story-breaking. Here are some examples. Because the movie doesn't feel like it's about enough things, for some reason, Kushner wedges in material about the gentrification of the Jets and Sharks neighborhood. This is supposed to, I guess, raise the stakes or something, but is actually pretty counterproductive. If the whole place is going to be demolished in a few weeks, meaning everyone will have to leave, it doesn't make sense for these two groups to be fighting over it in the meantime, especially in a winner-takes-all rumble. Whoever wins gets it for, like, a month, tops.
Buys us, 1 second.
If they were fighting over new territory they are staking out pending their forced relocations, that would make sense. But then that would mean thinking about the story point for longer than it takes to write it down, which is a Disney Fox no-no. First drafts only, please.
I am a worthless magician.
Tony and Riff's relationship is changed from actual friends who like each other to strained to the point of antagonism for no reason at all. I mean, the movie gives us the reason that Tony has changed since getting out of jail and Riff feels abandoned or something, but this doesn't serve the story in any productive way. It is not Riff, but Valentina who convinces Tony to go to the dance. For some reason. Tony and Riff fight over Riff's gun to the point that Tony cries over the apparent loss of his friend to the dark side. But the plot still needs him to impulsively avenge Riff's killing by Bernardo, like they're brothers.
Revenge!
I guess Tony Kushner was taking night classes from the Alex Kurtzman School of Male Character Writing, where the main curriculum point is that all male characters must be complete dicks all the time. Yay, nuance! Speaking of nuance, the addition of Tony's backstory of having just got out of jail for almost murdering someone derails the movie before it can start. Going to the dance would apparently be a parole violation for some reason? A serious consequence, except the movie forgets about it immediately and nothing comes of it. But more importantly, his incarceration seems to form a weird part of Tony's motivation for wanting to be with Maria. Rather than it just being youthful attraction, he frames it like he's a changed man and so wants to reach for someone pure like her, what Bernardo accurately diagnoses as a quest for moral redemption at her expense. Even though the movie doesn't believe this, it makes Tony come across as more manipulative than innocently impulsive. Just the type of likable characteristic you want in your tragic romantic lead. Also, the apparent bloodlust that overtakes him during his fight with Bernardo evaporates any sympathy we might have had for him. He doesn't end up killing Bernardo without thinking out of blind grief for his friend. He's already just barely almost murdered him because of man rage.
White male rage, white male rage.
We've already had multiple scenes where Tony and Riff aren't really friends anymore, and then a scene of Tony ruthlessly beating Nardo's face in Batman style before he stops when he realizes what he's doing. It's so sympathetic. Speaking of sympathetic, in this movie the Jets come off as pretty clear antagonists, which, while probably true for realism, actually helps nothing in the story. Remember in Romeo and Juliet how one of the warring families was pretty clear underdog and actually had some validity to their claims of abuse at the hands of the other family? Yeah, that's not what it was about. In the original West Side Story play and film, the plights of the Jets and Sharks are weighted more or less evenly by the story. The Sharks face racism and discrimination by the world they live in, while the Jets are discounted for being juvenile delinquents from broken or non-existent homes. Neither group sees a future in the society they are a part of, and in a weird way they share a certain camaraderie about this. They are equally nihilistic about their prospects, though for very different reasons. Hence, they are constantly fighting, even though that's only making things worse for themselves. This movie instead decides to take sides. It frames the Sharks as actual victims of actual racism, a thing they can't control or combat, notwithstanding their best efforts to assimilate or live above it or whatever. It frames the Jets as immature, petty thugs with unjustified victim complexes.
White male rage.
Sure, they might have had rough childhoods, but they just gotta get jobs and they'll be fine. Their socioeconomic circumstances are largely optional, while the Sharks aren't. What's silly is that none of this matters for the plot revolving around Marie and Tony. I think Kushner just wrote it this way because Disney Fox was worried about the optics of depicting a violent gang made up of a racial minority, unless they were like the good gang, which, whatever, but the result of this choice is that the story stops working. We shouldn't be rooting for either of these gangs. We should be rooting for Tony and Maria, our main characters, to escape the toxic world both gangs contribute to. Which gets harder to do when Maria comes from a highly sympathetic family group facing a ton of crap they can't do anything about, and Tony is best friends with a racist psychopath with a death wish.
Buzz and Woody at it again, it's white male rage.
Oh yeah, in this movie Riff is a freaking psychotic. In another movie, he's the kind of gang leader who would shoot Baby John to make the others fall in line when he proposes an unpopular plan. Not the scrappy hoodlum with a heart of gold you can at least feel for, even if you can't fully get behind him. At the very least, we need to believe Tony feels like Riff's death is tragic enough to avenge him without thinking.
Revenge!
Instead, what we're hoping for is that Maria will just leave town without him or just date the nice, awkward college boy her brother's friends with. Thematically, Maria and Tony need to kind of represent the groups they come from. They are the hope that two antagonistic groups can find harmony. But when one of them represents hard work in the face of discrimination and adversity, and the other represents violent adherence of white replacement theory, that theme starts to not really come through. Basically, you get the impression Kushner was trying to bring in more reality to make the story more grounded and believable, per Disney Fox's request. It's one of the big instances of Disney remake disease that we get in the film. We start to suspect that this movie is being made mostly to correct the problems and plot holes of the original for sensitive and cynical modern audiences who can't suspend their disbelief in a fictional musical story about singing street gangs. This approach would make sense if he were writing a non-musical historical drama examining early gang culture in 1950s New York, where the nuances of race and class are central to the conflict. But he's not. He's writing a musical where groups of men sing fun songs together and have dance fights in the background of a whirlwind romance. More reality only makes those elements seem more ridiculous, which means that our filmmakers don't really understand the fundamentals of the form they've chosen to work in. It's okay, I'm sure that won't turn into a problem later. So the screenplay has a bunch of stupid problems. The main story in a musical is told through the music, not the dialogue. That's the whole point. It's not like it's humanly possible to make Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim's songs somehow not convey the story they were written to tell.
You'd like to think that, wouldn't you?
When I first heard about this movie, my fear was that the producers would make terrible substantive changes to the music to make it appeal to modern audiences or something. Maybe that the arrangements and orchestrations would be horrible, or they would rely on electronic instrumentation, or they'd add terrible new songs, or that Hans Zimmer would be involved in any way. I'm happy to report that, for the most part, none of that technically happened. All of the performers, except one, did nice enough work with the material. The most you could say about the orchestrations is that they sound like rehearsal tracks. They are generally pretty lifeless and too artificially perfect for a jazz-based score, but generally sound like music. Instead, what our team was able to do is actually somehow worse than mangling Bernstein. As part of the reimagined script, the filmmakers also reimagined the context for some of the musical numbers in baffling ways, to the point that fundamental themes of the movie are entirely removed. I'm going to focus on the three big ones in order of badness. I Feel Pretty. In this movie, Maria's I Feel Pretty number comes immediately after the Rumble, where you'll remember her lover Tony murders her brother Bernardo, which of course she doesn't know about yet. This is technically what happened in the original stage production, though Stephen Sondheim has been very clear that he hates the number and was essentially forced to write it because the producers felt the show needed something upbeat after the Rumble, and even though it feels really weird and undercuts the drama and whatever. In the 1961 film, he was able to have the song moved to before the Rumble, allowing the drama to continue more or less uninterrupted while giving Maria some characterization earlier in the story. Obviously the better choice. Kushner, apparently wanting to capture a film adaptation more in line with the original, moves the number back to its original placement after the Rumble. Apparently Sondheim begged them to just cut it entirely, but Kushner insisted it was necessary, so we feel the gut punch Maria gets upon learning Tony killed Bernardo, or something, even though we would get that feeling anyway with or without a musical number beforehand. You know, just like we do in the 61 film. Either way, not the end of the world really, and I guess there's an argument for it since that's how the original play was staged, but I think Sondheim is right about how intrusive and unproductively disruptive the song is. Whatever. Cool. Things start to go off the rails with Cool. In the play, this number comes after the dance, when the Jets are restlessly waiting for the Sharks to come to their war council, so they sing it to blow off some steam. They sing the Officer Krupke number to calm down after the Rumble and Riff's death. The 61 film switches these songs around, again in, I think, a productive way. The Jets are killing time before the war council, so they have a little fun roasting Krupke, while at the same time giving us some characterization of their plight, mirroring what has already taken place with the Puerto Ricans singing America. Then they have to cool down after the Rumble so they don't get caught, hence Cool. The new movie keeps the Krupke number before the Rumble like the 61 film. Its staging in the police station is almost painfully literal. Not the only time, but it's fine. But Cool also appears before the Rumble in the silliest possible way. Riff and Tony arguing about Riff's decision to buy a gun to bring to the Rumble. Rather than an energy-expelling dance number, it's just kind of a fight that ends when Tony is bested and his friends walk away, leaving him to cry a single pathetic tear and do nothing about the gun until going to the Rumble several hours later, where he still does nothing about the gun. Here's why this is silly. The only reason Riff brings a gun to the Rumble is because Disney Fox thinks it's a plot hole that we don't see where Chino gets his gun, so the script makes Riff take it to the Rumble and then just not use it. Maybe it wants to be, like, poetic or something that Tony gets killed by the gun that he tried to make his friend not bring, but that doesn't happen. The scene only serves to drive Riff and Tony further apart, not the womb-to-tomb best buds the story needs us to think they are. By the end, they can't communicate and don't even have a shared worldview anymore. Tony cries a tear at the end, because of a reason, but the story needs him to immediately get over it so he can look forward to meeting his love later that night after stopping the rumble with little to no trouble. You'd think if your former best friend was taking a gun to kill your girlfriend's brother, he'd be more urgent about it, but again, that would mean thinking about the implications of the scene longer than it takes to write it, which isn't what we do here. And now the movie has nothing to have anybody do after the rumble except run around a little bit, which makes the third act a pace-free slog. We don't really see the Jets react to the death of Riff except for a couple of lines before Anita shows up to the drugstore 5 minutes before the movie ends. The only numbers we get are I Feel Pretty, which, as I said, is awkward and inappropriate, A Boy Like That, which is fine, and Tony and Maria's reconciliation, which is awkward and inappropriate for reasons we'll get to. So, not in story-breaking territory yet, but it's a choice that makes things more confusing while muddying characterization that should be really pretty clean-cut at this point. Somewhere. By far the biggest musical botchment comes with Somewhere. In the play, it is sung by an offstage figure while an impressionistic ballet number happens. In the 1961 film, Tony and Maria sing it to each other because they ran out of time to shoot the ballet sequence, but I think it works much better. Either way, the song does all of the story work of convincing the audience that our two young lovers can actually still be together, and the emotional work of getting us on their side even after all that has happened. It also lays out the thematic framework for the whole play, the hope that somehow, someway, it's possible for love to exist even when everything around you is trying to kill it. In both versions, it is tragically reprised by Maria as Tony lies dying in her arms. This is why I think the film works better, since it is a personal callback between the two characters. I'm not exaggerating when I say it's the most important song in the whole play. Our film opts for something closer to the stage play, giving the song to Valentina, who sings it alone in the drugstore over a montage of various side characters being sad and stuff. It's moving because it's Her Majesty Rita Moreno singing it, and it's a beautiful piece of music. But as with the stage play, it doesn't have quite the impact as Tony and Maria singing it to each other does. This is fine. What isn't fine is what happens after. Our boy Kushner, perhaps because Disney told him it would be a plot hole to have Maria start singing a song she's never heard as her love dies, instead decides to have her reprise the opening lines from Tonight, where she says that Tony is the only thing she'll see forever. I guess not the worst thing she could be expressing in a vacuum where 2.5 hours of story haven't been building up to a final tragic thematic pronouncement, but also definitely not the right thing at all. Consider the difference. Reprising your song of hope that has been tragically disproved, there's a place for us, somewhere a place for us, hold my hand and I'll take you there, or essentially, I'll think about you a lot now because you're my crush.
Her?
One of those things is correct, and one of them is a kick in the thematic shins.
Ah! Ah! Ah!
It's baffling. There is no reason at all to have Maria sing this line. I mean, I can see how it's sad to sing "You're the only thing I'll see forever" to your dying love, but that's not really the point of the scene. I mean, shoot, if we're being forced to use that song, it's not even the most poignant line you could pick to reprise. When you dream, dream of me. Obviously better. By having Maria reprise Tonight instead of Somewhere, the movie stops being a tragedy about the vain hope of finding harmony in a toxic world and starts being about love in vague general terms.
I wanna know what love is.
It's the 9th grade Cliff's Notes version of this story. So yeah, our filmmakers found a way to somehow use the music of West Side Story to not tell the story of West Side Story. In their vein, and I'll say hubristic attempts to add more to it or reinterpret it or whatever, they ineptly erased what makes it potent and beautiful in the first place. Good job, guys. Another successful Disney remake in the bag.
Great job, everybody. It's great to meet you.
The good news is that, by and large, the cast does fine with the material they're given. For me, Mike Feist, I don't know, as Riff is the only one whose performance reaches for anything really interesting. But on the other hand, I've already talked about how the way that character is written kind of wrecks the movie. So, give and take. Everybody else is fine.
Except for...
It's time we talk about our boy Ansel Elgort, the charisma vacuum and alleged sex pest who torpedoes everybody else's acting efforts, and the movie also. Here are the qualities a romantic leading man has. Physically awkward. Not that handsome. Not that emotive. Not that good of a singer, alone or with others.
I've just met a girl named Marie.
A negative amount of chemistry with Rachel Zegler, who often looks like she would rather be anywhere else than in a room alone with him. His attempts to be impetuous come across as creepy. His attempts to be gracious come across as condescending. His attempts to be innocent and idealistic come across as manipulative and controlling. All of these things actively work against us investing in the story as a whole and Tony and Maria's relationship in particular. The most on board I got was, I guess he's cuter than Chino? But generally my feelings were more along the lines of, girl, you can do better, and him? With the occasional ugh sprinkled in. Poor Rachel's in there trying to act her heart out, and all she's getting from Ansel is blank, lifeless eyes and monotone speech. It's like you went to the Vulcan School of Performing Arts. I mean, you've got Steven Spielberg directing freaking West Side Story. How is this who we ended up with for our leading man? It probably got 50,000 audition tapes, and this was the best one? A guy with the face of a derpy 13-year-old and the emotive powers of a Game Boy NPC? It's so bad the poster doesn't even try to hide it. It's actually a perfect encapsulation of what I'm talking about. He's in there being awkward, not that handsome, not that emotive, not having chemistry with Rachel Zegler, who's trying her darndest to look like she wants to be with this man because it's her job and she's a professional. But he's just coming off as creepy and weird. This is the behavior of a space alien impersonating the humans, not any real person ever.
We are merely exchanging long protein strings. If you can think of a simpler way, I'd like to hear it.
Anyway. I have a few quickie observations before I wrap up. 1. All the Jets are visually identical and have the same personality, to the point that after Riff is killed and we are hanging out in the drugstore, I thought for a second that the filmmakers forgot about it and had him in there. Worse, they're all in, drab jailhouse gray, which is boring and then confusing. Behold this unrelated gang from an unrelated movie. 2. If we know anything about the history of gender non-conforming and trans people in this country, we can feel comfortable that anybody's, as depicted here, would definitely be accepted by the Jets in the end, and definitely not horribly beaten or outright killed by any one of them long before the movie starts. But it's alright, having anybody's around shows the Jets aren't all bad. They're horribly racist and violent and try to rape a girl, but they're down with gender fluidity. Don't look now, Disney just solved transphobia, guys.
Great job, everybody!
3. Pro tip. Don't stage your first big romantic moment between your romantic leads in a well-lit, beautiful, dreamlike setting. Just do it behind the dirty bleachers in the dark. How romantic and cinematic! 4. Pro tip. To capture the obvious and overwhelming chemistry between your two romantic leads, stage your next big romantic moment between them, obscuring their faces with the filthy metal grate the guy paws at like an animal. How romantic and cinematic! 5. This is possibly the most literal musical film I've ever seen. By that I mean that the only thing it knows how to do when staging musical numbers is to depict literally what they are saying with their words. I already mentioned staging Dear Officer Krupke in his literal police office, but here are other examples. Showing singers during America literally enjoying buying things on credit and looking at nice appliances as they sing about doing and wanting those things. Staging Maria and Tony's pretend wedding in a literal chapel lest we don't pick up on them making a spiritual commitment to each other. All the gun references in Cool being about an actual literal gun? Like the line, got a rocket in your pocket. So much cooler when it's about an actual literal gun in your real pocket and not, a metaphor for emotion you don't know how to control or express. It even goes out of its way to show us there is indeed a mambo band in attendance during the mambo number, lest we assume they're all just hallucinating it, I guess.
Oye, Javi! Ponle fuego, vamos!
I'm surprised the line, "Here come the jets like a bat out of hell," isn't accompanied by literal bats flying out of an abandoned building or something. As we all know, if there's a genre that benefits from literalness, it's definitely the fantasy musical. Anyway, I guess my last thought about this movie is, why now? Why did the world need another film adaptation of West Side Story? What was Steven Spielberg trying to express that wasn't covered in the original, apart from that he likes it and it was important to him growing up or something? Like, that's nice, but he's the only person in the world who cares about that. Why should we? I ask because at the end of the day, it doesn't really feel meaningfully different from a movie that casts a huge shadow. I mean, there are technically quite a lot of different things about it, but those changes, as I've pointed out, largely don't add anything to the story. They just make what is there less coherent and impactful, which I'm sure wasn't the intent. I can't imagine that Steven thought, you know what, I really like this story, but I just find it too clear and emotionally resonant. We need to tone all that down. Or, maybe that was the point. Disney Fox was like, sure, we'll do the movie, but get rid of all that touchy-feely stuff, and also anything that makes sense. We make spectacles, not coherent narratives. When the play and original movie came out, the social issues they were dealing with, juvenile delinquency and street gangs, were all pretty new. That was kind of the point. Robbins and Bernstein wanted to do a modern take on Romeo and Juliet, and there were a bunch of stories in the news about nihilistic youths killing each other in the street, and they were like, hey, that'll work. And the approach to the music and dancing was equally modern, if not avant-garde. But now, 60 plus years later, these are all just kind of quaint. Our conception of gangs is a lot harder to romanticize, and the music and choreography is classic, the opposite of avant-garde. That's why we like it and go to revivals of it. So trying to tell a timely or modern story with those elements now seems kind of like a fool's errand, unless you've got something amazing to contribute to it, which plainly isn't the case here. Of course, we still have problems in our society with issues like racism and xenophobia, and if anything, it feels like that's what this movie wants to zero in on. The paratext of the movie is basically, we're fixing racism by not casting white people to play Puerto Ricans, and they can speak Spanish sometimes, so long as they then also report the important stuff in English so we can get it. But having a movie that just says, racism bad, why can't we just get along, isn't exactly breaking new ground. Heck, it's not even the first New York City Latino community-based musical from 2021 covering that material. This is why it feels like a Disney remake, more than anything else. It feels like it exists primarily to cash in on a beloved property while scrubbing over the elements that modern audiences are sensitive to because they saw a hot take on BuzzFeed. The film is a feature-length apologia for not casting many Latino actors in a film made by our great-grandparents, and fixes flaws like making sure we know Maria is 18, guys, don't worry, and dance-fighting choreography jaded audiences might find silly. Something the choreographer actually said. Sounds like he's jazzed about being on the project. Obviously, this film benefits from its casting choices, except one, and the depth and nuance we get in the characterization of the Puerto Rican characters is like the only addition that improves on the material, and I wouldn't want to take anything away from anyone who felt seen or represented in a new or more authentic way as a result. But the film overall, due to the remarkable ineptness of its storytelling, fails to turn any of that into anything very narratively meaningful or memorable, which is of course the point and a huge disappointment. I'm sure someone at some point felt strongly about why they wanted to remake this of all movies, but that never makes it into the final film, which is why it feels like a piece of cynical corporate product like any other Disney remake and not a real movie. I can't imagine it's going to make anyone ask, oh, which one? When someone says they want to watch West Side Story, or that anyone will be excited when it's the only version of the movie they can find on Disney+. I mean, technically it's better than having no West Side Story at all, but not by very much. Anyway, I guess that'll about do it for this analysis no one asked for of a movie no one asked for. I'll see you next time. Till then, I'll be taking bets as to whether when Disney remakes The Sound of Music, they'll turn Rolf from Hitler youth boy love interest into just platonic friend who helps Liesel with her science experiments, or rewrite him to be a girl that Liesel is secretly in lesbians with but never kisses so the movie isn't banned in China and Florida. Vote in the comments below.
But the thing that this movie is really about is white male rage.
Ah!